Hello and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Today we are at the top of the Mount of Olives to follow the steps of Jesus. Let's visit the place where Jesus ascended to heaven and where he will also return according to the Bible itself. So if you are ready, let's get started. With Aline. Today we are at the top of the Mount of Olives. To follow the steps of the Mount of Olives is one of Jesus's favorite places. He came here in moments of joy and celebration, like for example when he made the triumphant entry. He came here in important moments of introspection and prayer when he taught his disciples here. But Jesus also came here in some of the most difficult moments of his life. On his last morning of freedom, after the Last Supper, he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is right down at the foot of the Mount of Olives. In Gethsemane, Jesus will go through his agony. Jesus' agony is so great that he sweats drops of blood. That is, in such a difficult moment of his life, that he knows that in a few moments he will be betrayed by Judas, one of his 12 apostles, that he will be arrested by Caiaphas, condemned by Pontius Pilate, and crucified the next morning. And so, in this moment of great difficulty, when he knows all this will happen, he comes precisely to the foot of the Mount of Olives. But today, we will focus on the last story of Jesus on the Mount of Olives, which is his ascension. Jesus ascends to heaven from the highest point of the Mount of Olives, which is hard to believe, but it's not where we are now. Are we really at a very high point with a privileged view? But if we look a little bit over here, we can see that there is an even higher side on the Mount of Olives, and the ascension happened from there. So we are now going to start walking in this direction. Do you know why the Mount of Olives is named that way? Because in biblical times, much of it was covered with olive trees. So we can see two of them here beside us, but imagine if we were walking here in the times of Jesus 2,000 years ago, we would see much more olive trees than we see today, but the landscape has changed a bit. For example, the Jewish cemetery that is down here, it already existed, but it has grown. Also, some churches were built here, even a hotel on the Mount of Olives. So there are fewer olive trees than in biblical times, but we can still see some of them around here. When we say that we are going to follow in Jesus' footsteps, it's literally to visit most of the places in the Holy Land. We have to do them walking. Places are accessible to cars or buses. And also the walking experience is even more intense. I mean, even stronger, literally following the steps. And as I had said that we are going to the highest point of the Mount of Olives, you can see here that we are really now starting a climb. It's a bit of a steep climb. Our first stop will be here at Pater Noster, the Our Father Church. Just as we're entering now, there's a whole group from South Korea, Christians from South Korea leaving. But let's go in because we have a lot of cool things to show you inside. This church is one of the 4 oldest in all of the Holy Land. Unfortunately, over the centuries, this church was destroyed and rebuilt several times. So what we are seeing here is the modern church, but we can also see the archaeological remains here together. So we know that this is a place of Christian worship since the first Christians of the Holy Land. Why? Because of what we're going to talk about inside the cave. I just want to show you something before. Do you see that the church is currently under renovation? At this moment, due to the conflict, there are fewer tourists and pilgrims in Israel. So many people are now taking the opportunity to make renovations and further improve these places to welcome future pilgrims. So the next time I show this place, probably to you, this work will have already been completed. They are not building anything new, but they are renovating what is already here, and along with that, archaeological excavations are always being done. But let's now enter the oldest part of this entire place, which is the part of Jesus' temples, which is down here. Jesus used to come to the Mount of Olives to teach his disciples both day and night. And here on the Mount of Olives, depending on the time of year, it can be very hot, very cold, rainy and windy, especially in the late afternoon, early morning. There is a lot of wind here. So for Jesus and his disciples to be out of the elements, out of all this, they often went into caves. And we are now in one of those caves. Jesus teaches his disciples the Lord's Prayer twice, once in Galilee and the second time here in Judea on the Mount of Olives. Come here with me, we can see original parts of this cave here. So imagine that here 2,000 years ago was Jesus teaching. But in what language was he teaching? Jesus spoke 2 languages, both Hebrew and Aramaic, and he spoke and prayed in these 2 languages. But the most common language for prayer at that time was Hebrew. And since we are now inside the Our Father's cave, I want you to hear the Our Father in its original language, in Hebrew. And now let's continue our climb to the ascension site. Does the Bible say that Jerusalem will be a place of prayer for all nations? And we see how this really happens even to this day. When we were arriving, we saw a group from South Korea leaving. And on normal days, if we stop here, we see groups from different nations passing one after the other. People from different corners of the world who speak different languages, all united by faith in the Bible. And that's why when this church was built, what was done, they put the Lord's Prayer here in different languages. And of course, they also put Portuguese here in honor of the nations of the world that speak Portuguese, among them Portugal and Brazil. But if you look at the text, you can see that it is a bit different from what we are used to. That's because this is archaic Portuguese. This is well before the last orthographic reforms that occurred, for example, in Brazil. And that's why this Portuguese might sound a little different than what we're used to, but it's the same Our Father. But here in the church, they didn't put one in Portuguese, but actually 2. They added a few years ago another Our Father in Portuguese, a little smaller, and the other Portuguese in special tribute to Brazilian Portuguese. And that's where we're going now. And I really like this part here, these Our Fathers that are on the wall, because they are in Braille. So we can read, for example, here in Italian, the Our Father in Braille. So the place is accessible to all people. And here by our side, we can see another Our Father in Portuguese. And this one you can see is written Portuguese from Brazil, meaning this one was placed especially in honor of Brazilian Portuguese. So there is the archaic Portuguese that we have already seen, and the Portuguese from Brazil here in honor of our Brazilian nation. Notice that the path we are taking now is the one that connects between Old Jerusalem and Bethany. This is very important because Luke tells us that between these two cities is the location of the Ascension. So we know we are going to the right place. And I also want to invite you now to watch the video until the end, because we will have an announcement, a special surprise for you. Look at this yellow sign. It's written here in several languages, Chapel of the Ascension, which is clearly a Christian place. The question is, why at the place that is written Chapel of the Ascension is there nowadays a minaret that is a mosque? And that's what we're going to find out now. As you can see, the door is currently closed. In a little while, someone will come especially to open it for us. But notice beforehand that there are two doors. The green door, which leads to the side of the ascent, which is where we are going. But there is a second glass door here. And this door, it leads to the other side of the mosque, which is an active place of Muslim prayer. And beneath this mosque, inside it, you have access to tombs. They are Christian Byzantine tombs. They are from Christian pilgrims from about 1,500 years ago. But unfortunately, because this part is an active mosque, non-Muslims like us are not allowed to enter. But know that here is a continuation of this Christian complex, and see here in this part that we can indeed enter. The entrance costs 10 shekels, which is approximately $3 or 15 reals. And now, folks, we have finally entered this very important place. Just a few meters from where I am now is the site of Jesus' Ascension, one of the most important biblical passages. This event is described in Luke and also in the book of Acts, but it's such a significant event that it's also mentioned many, many times. I'm going to leave all these quotes on the screen for you. And that's why when pilgrims come to the Holy Land, they want to see the place of the Ascension. The pilgrims of today, but also the pilgrims of ancient times. We have records from the earliest pilgrims who came here. An example that I really like is of Geria, a Christian who comes to the Holy Land in the year 384, and she records in her diary her visits, her pilgrimage, and she tells us that she arrives here in an open and deserted place, in a high place on the mountain, as we are. So she comes here and she says that she sees the place of the Ascension, and she also says that this place is next to the cave that we just visited before. The cave of Eliona, the cave of Noster, according to these ancient records, is very close. And that's why both the records of the pilgrims and archaeology and Christian tradition all of this fits together to really tell us that this is the place of the ascension. And before we go in together, I want to show you a little bit of the archaeology of this place. In the times of Jesus and in the following centuries, this place was a peak of the mountain, an open, deserted place, until Pomania arrives. Around the year 390 AD, she built the first church here. But a very important thing she left is that the church was open to the heavens to connect the architecture of the place with the biblical history, with the ascension of Jesus. However, this beautiful church will be destroyed in the year 614 by the Persian invasion. The Persians, where today is Iran, really make a devastating invasion. They will destroy most of the churches in the Holy Land. And along with all the churches, this place will also be completely destroyed. Until a few years later, Bishop Franco arrives here, and he will be the one who rebuilds the church, but always keeping it open to the heavens. And now look here with me at what's around us. We can see some remnants of the original church from the Byzantine period. And what we can see best preserved here are these column bases. Besides this part of the column, we have another Byzantine column here. But I want you to also notice one more thing. Notice that there are several altars here, because even though this place is now controlled by a mosque, one day a year, which is on the date of Jesus' ascension, 40 days after Easter, the churches come here to hold celebrations, and they remember this event. So we can see here the Armenian altar, the Armenians, who are the first Christian nation in the world. The Armenians converted as early as 301. So we see the Armenian altar. We also see here the Coptic altar, meaning the Egyptian church, also a very old and traditional church. And also this altar here on the side belongs to the Syrian church, also known as the Aramaic church. So here, once a year, the churches gather to celebrate the events of the Ascension. And once again, the church was destroyed and then rebuilt by the Crusaders. Come here with me. We can see, for example, these columns, the beautiful marble columns with all carved capitals. They are original from the Crusader period. When they rebuilt the church, once again, they made it open, not only to the heavens, but also all the sides. We can see that all these stones were placed afterwards. The church was open. Until Saladin arrives in 1187, he leads a Muslim invasion of the entire Holy Land. And he takes many holy places like this one here and turns them into Muslim places, into mosques. So they go and close the walls and also close the top. And so it remains to this day as a closed mosque. But we talked a lot here about the archaeological remains, about the architecture. But we came here today to see the place of the Ascension, to talk about Jesus' ascent to heaven and also about his return. So folks, let's now circle this entire building and enter together. Let's go. What is it? Wow. We are now inside the Chapel of the Ascension, and I want to show you something special that's in here. Look at this stone. It's the only part still preserved from the times of Jesus. Tradition says that this exact stone is where Jesus ascended to heaven, the place of ascension. And we can see that it has been preserved through the ages. People in ancient times placed these stones around it to protect it and separate it from the rest of the building. That is, they wanted this place to remain accessible, that people could continue to touch it, come here to look and pray, but at the same time, people simply could not walk over it. And since we are in such a special place at the site of the Ascension, I now want to invite us to listen to the biblical passage that speaks of this event. So those who were gathered with Jesus asked him, "Is this the time when the Lord will restore the kingdom to Israel?" Jesus replied, Having said this, Jesus was lifted up to the heights in their sight, and a cloud hid him from their eyes. And I want to hear one more verse with you. Specifically, listen to Acts 1, verse 11. And as they were gazing intently into the sky while Jesus was going, behold, 2 men in white clothing stood beside them and said, "Men of Galilee, why are you standing here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who was with you and was taken up to heaven will return in the same way you saw him go up." Did you hear how amazing that was? The Bible tells us that in the same way Jesus ascended to heaven is the same way he will return. So from the ascension of this place, many believe that when the Bible speaks of the return of Jesus, it is also in the same way. It's the descent here by the Mount of Olives. And that's why when I come here to this place with the caravans, I like to talk not only about the past of this place, the historical events, the destructions, reconstructions, and archaeological findings. I also like to come here to think about the future that the Bible points out to us that will probably happen here. So, only time will tell, but there is a probability that this place is connected with very important future events and the return of Jesus. I had promised you a surprise, and to tell you what that surprise is, I want to call my father here. Everyone say hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, dear daughter. Are you okay? With you folks, I came here to announce the launch of a wonderful caravan, Turkey and Greece with Jorge. Come with me, we will make an unforgettable and wonderful biblical tour for all of our souls there. So folks, it's really going to be an unforgettable trip, a unique journey through the pages of the Bible. So for all those who want more information, we will leave the link. The link is down below. The link is down below, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to leave a like and see you next time, folks. Bye, folks.